My name is Cora Dillard and I am 33 years old. 7 weeks ago, my mother drove 4 hours from Beaufort, South Carolina, to the city where I live, knocked on the front door of the home I share with my husband and our 2-year-old daughter, and stood on my porch holding a white envelope with both hands the way you hold something you want to look like a peace offering. She had not spoken to me in 6 years. She did not say she was sorry. She said, "Your father and I have been praying about this, and we think it's time for Jonah to meet the family." Jonah is my husband. He is a good man. He is a kind man. He is the reason I have a home that smells like coffee in the morning and sounds like a child laughing in the afternoon. He is also black, and that is the only reason my mother had not spoken to me in 6 years. She stood on my porch in a pale yellow blouse with her hands wrapped around that envelope, and she said the word family like she hadn't spent 6 years making sure I understood I no longer belonged to one. What she did not know was that the envelope she was holding was not the only piece of paper that mattered that day. 3 months earlier, I had received a letter of my own, from my grandmother's attorney in Walterboro, South Carolina, and that letter had changed every calculation my mother thought she'd already made. Before I tell you what happened next, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Drop your city and the time where you are in the comments. I read every single one, and I love knowing where you're watching from. Now let me take you back to the beginning, because this story doesn't start on my porch. It starts in a yellow kitchen in Beaufort, South Carolina, the summer I turned 9 years old, when my grandmother taught me that the most important thing a woman can own is the record of what actually happened. My grandmother's name was Ruth Dillard. She was my father's mother, and she was the kind of woman who kept every receipt, every letter, every birthday card in a cedar chest at the foot of her bed. She had a system. Envelopes labeled by year, tied with kitchen twine, stacked in order. She told me once that she started keeping records when she was a young woman because she'd learned the hard way that memory is the first thing people rewrite when it becomes inconvenient for them. I was 9 years old and I didn't fully understand what she meant. I do now. Grandma Ruth lived in a 2-bedroom house on Marshfield Road in Walterboro, 40 minutes from where I grew up. The house had a screened porch that looked out over a stand of loblolly pines, and she kept a hummingbird feeder just outside the kitchen window that she filled every Thursday morning without fail. The kitchen was yellow. Not a soft yellow, a real yellow, the color of a school bus, and it smelled like the cast iron skillet she used for everything and the lavender hand cream she kept on the windowsill. When I was small, I spent every other weekend at that house. My older brother Davis went sometimes, but mostly he stayed home with my parents. I was the one who wanted to go. I was the one who sat at Grandma Ruth's kitchen table and learned how to play gin rummy and how to balance a checkbook and how to press a shirt correctly so the collar lay flat. My parents were not unkind people in the ordinary sense. My father, Raymond Dillard, worked for a marine salvage company out of Beaufort and was home about half the time. He was quiet, careful, the kind of man who agreed with the last person who spoke to him. My mother, Sandra, ran the household with the efficiency of someone who had decided early on how things were supposed to look and arranged everything accordingly. She was the president of the Women's Auxiliary at our church for 11 years. She baked for every funeral and every wedding in our neighborhood. She was warm to everyone she considered part of her world, and she had a very clear picture of what that world contained. Davis was 2 years older than me, and he was, by every visible measure, my mother's primary project. His baseball games, his college applications, his social life, his future, all of it received my mother's full organizational attention. I don't say that with bitterness. It was simply true. I was a quiet child who read too much and asked too many questions and did not require the same management. My mother interpreted this as self-sufficiency. Grandma Ruth interpreted it as loneliness, and she was right. The summer I turned 13, Grandma Ruth sat with me on her screened porch after dinner and said something I have carried for 20 years. She said, "Cora, the people who love you correctly will never ask you to be smaller to fit their comfort." She was shelling butter beans when she said it, her hands moving without looking, the bowl between us filling slowly. I asked her what she meant. She said, "You'll know when someone's asking." Then she handed me a handful of beans to shell, and we sat there until the light went gold over the pines. I did not know then that she was already watching my mother. I did not know that she had been watching for years. I grew up in Beaufort knowing I wanted to leave, though I would not have said it that way at 15 or 16. I would have said I wanted to study environmental science, which was true. I wanted to work on water quality research, which was also true. The University of Georgia offered me a partial scholarship when I was 17, and I accepted it the same afternoon the letter arrived, before my mother had finished reading it. I drove to Walterboro that evening to tell Grandma Ruth first. She made sweet tea and we sat at the yellow kitchen table, and she held my hand across the surface and said, "Good. Go learn everything." She pressed $200 in cash into my palm when I left. It was folded inside a birthday card she'd already signed, even though my birthday was 4 months away. College was the first time I understood what it felt like to be fully myself without managing anyone's reaction to it. I studied hard. I made friends who became family. I took a research position with a watershed monitoring project the summer between my sophomore and junior years, which is where I met Jonah. Jonah Okafor was a graduate student in the environmental engineering program. He was from Atlanta originally, the son of a civil engineer and a high school principal, and he had the kind of steady, unhurried manner that made you feel like whatever you were saying was worth hearing. We worked on the same field team for 6 weeks before either of us said anything that wasn't about water samples or data logs. Then one evening at the end of a long day, sitting on the tailgate of the department truck watching the sun go down over the Oconee River, he said, "You're the most careful thinker I've ever met," and I said, "You're the only person who's ever noticed," and that was the beginning of everything. We dated through my senior year and his dissertation year. We were careful and deliberate, the way people are when they know something is real and they don't want to damage it by moving too fast. By the time I graduated, we had been together for 2 years. He had accepted a position with an engineering consulting firm in Charlotte, North Carolina. I had been offered a research coordinator role with a state water quality agency in the same city. We moved there together in August, a week after my graduation, into a 2-bedroom apartment above a dry cleaner's on Caldwell Street that smelled like steam and solvent and felt, to me, like the first place I had ever chosen entirely on my own terms. I called my mother to tell her about Charlotte. She asked if Jonah was coming too. I said yes. There was a pause. 4 seconds, maybe 5. And then she said, "Well, I suppose that's your choice to make." I said it was. She said she'd talk to my father and call me back. She did not call back for 11 days. When she did, she said she and my father had been praying about it, and they felt that Jonah and I moving to the same city together was not something they could support. I asked what that meant. She said it meant they needed some time. I said I understood. I did not understand. I was 24 years old and I was standing in our new apartment holding the phone while Jonah sat at the kitchen table reading a water quality report, and I looked at him and thought, I am not giving this up. I am not giving him up. I called Grandma Ruth that evening. She listened to the whole thing without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "You already know what you're going to do, Cora. I just want you to know that I know too, and I think you're right." She asked me to come see her the next time I was back in South Carolina. I said I would. 3 months later, my mother called again. My father was on the line too, which meant she had orchestrated the call and he was there to provide the weight of his presence. She said they had talked to Pastor Ellis and to several people in the family, and that they had come to the conclusion that my relationship with Jonah was something they could not endorse. She used the word endorse. She said they were not asking me to end the relationship, only to understand that they could not be part of my life while it was ongoing. She said they loved me. She said this was hard for them. She said she hoped I would come to see things differently in time. I held the phone for a long moment after she finished. My hands did not shake. I noticed that. I said, "I understand what you're saying." I said, "I hope you'll come to see things differently too." And then I said, "I love you both," and I meant it, and I hung up. I sat on the edge of our bed for a while after that. Not crying, just sitting. Jonah came and sat beside me without asking what was wrong, because he already knew. He put his hand over mine on the comforter and we stayed like that for a long time without saying anything. That silence was one of the kindest things anyone has ever given me. I want to pause here for a moment, because I think some of you know exactly what that phone call feels like. Not the specifics, maybe, but the shape of it. The way someone can love you and still ask you to be smaller, still put conditions on the table like they're doing you a favor. If you've ever been handed a version of yourself that someone else decided was acceptable and been told to choose between that version and the real one, drop the word "seen" in the comments. I want to know you're out there. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. These stories are for you. Now, back to where we were. The silence from my family lasted 6 years, and I want to be honest about what those 6 years actually looked like, because it was not 6 years of continuous grief. It was something more complicated than that. There were months that were genuinely hard. My wedding, which my parents did not attend, though I had sent the invitation, the birth of my daughter Lily, whom my parents had never held, the ordinary Tuesday evenings when I would see a recipe on a cooking show that reminded me of my mother's kitchen and feel the loss of it like a bruise you forget about until you press it. But there were also 6 years of building something real. Jonah and I got married in the spring of 2019 in a small ceremony in Charlotte with 22 people we loved. His parents flew in from Atlanta and his mother danced at the reception until 11 o'clock. My best friend from college, Tara, was my maid of honor. Grandma Ruth was there, in a navy blue dress with pearl buttons, and she cried through the whole ceremony in the quiet, dignified way she did everything. She held my face in her hands afterward and said, "This is right. I have always known this was right." My father sent a card. It arrived 3 days after the wedding, which I have always believed was intentional, timed so that he could say he'd acknowledged it without having to be there. The card was a generic congratulations card from a drugstore, signed Dad in his careful printing. My mother's name was not on it. Grandma Ruth came to Charlotte twice a year after the wedding. She adored Jonah with the practical, unsentimental affection of someone who evaluated people by how they acted rather than what they said, and Jonah acted like a man who deserved to be adored. When Lily was born in the spring of 2021, Grandma Ruth drove herself to Charlotte at 78 years old, arrived at the hospital with a casserole dish wrapped in a dish towel and a hand-knitted blanket in yellow and white, and sat in the hospital room holding Lily for 2 hours without saying much of anything. Just holding her. When she left, she kissed my forehead and said, "She has your eyes and your stubbornness. She'll be fine." Grandma Ruth died in October of 2022. She was 79 years old. She had a stroke on a Sunday evening and was gone by Tuesday morning, and I was with her at the hospital in Walterboro when she passed, holding her hand. My father was there too, quiet in the corner chair the way he was quiet everywhere. My mother came for the last few hours. We did not speak beyond the necessary logistics of the room. The funeral was in Walterboro, at the church Grandma Ruth had attended for 51 years. I sat in the second row with Jonah and Lily, who was 18 months old and did not fully understand what was happening but was unusually still, as though she sensed the gravity of the room. My mother sat across the aisle with Davis and his wife and their 3 children. She did not look at me during the service. I did not look at her either. I looked at the casket, which was oak, and at the spray of white chrysanthemums on top, and I thought about the yellow kitchen and the cedar chest and the hummingbird feeder and the $200 folded inside a birthday card. I thought about all the ways Grandma Ruth had been quietly, methodically building something on my behalf, and I thought about how much I still didn't know. I found out in January, 3 months after the funeral, when I received a letter from an attorney named Gerald Harmon in Walterboro. He had been Grandma Ruth's attorney for 22 years. The letter was brief and professional. It said that Ruth Elaine Dillard had executed a trust in 2016, and that I was the sole primary beneficiary. It said the trust held the house on Marshfield Road, a savings account, and a brokerage account. It said the total value at the time of her death was approximately $340,000. It said Mr. Harmon would like to schedule a meeting at my earliest convenience. I read the letter twice at the kitchen table while Lily was napping. Then I set it down and pressed my hands flat on the table and sat very still for a long time. My father was not a beneficiary. My brother Davis was not a beneficiary. My mother, who was not a Dillard by birth and had never been close to Grandma Ruth, was not a beneficiary. The trust had been established 6 years earlier, which meant Grandma Ruth had done this the same year my mother cut me off. She had watched what happened and she had acted. She had not told me. She had simply acted, quietly, the way she did everything, and she had left me the record of what actually happened. I drove to Walterboro in February to meet with Gerald Harmon. His office was on the second floor of a building on Hampton Street, above a hardware store, and it smelled like old paper and coffee and a little bit like the cedar chest. He was a man in his mid-60s with reading glasses on a cord and the careful, measured manner of someone who had delivered a great deal of complicated news over a long career. He walked me through the trust documents with patience and precision. The house, the accounts, all of it was mine. He said Grandma Ruth had updated the trust 3 times over the years, most recently in 2021, after Lily was born. He said she had also left a letter. He slid it across the desk in a plain white envelope with my name on the front in her handwriting. I recognized the handwriting the way you recognize a voice, immediately, physically, somewhere in the chest. I did not open it in his office. I thanked him, put the envelope in my bag, drove to Marshfield Road, parked in the gravel driveway, and sat on the screened porch in the cold February air for 20 minutes before I opened it. The letter was 2 pages, written in her clear, deliberate script. She said she had been watching my mother for a long time and had understood for a long time what kind of love my mother was capable of and what kind she was not. She said she did not write this to be cruel but to be honest, because honesty was the only thing she had ever found worth leaving behind. She said she had set up the trust because she wanted me to have a foundation that no one could take away and no one could use as leverage. She said the house was mine to keep or sell as I saw fit, but she hoped I would keep it, because she had loved that house and she thought I had too. She said one more thing, near the end of the 2nd page. She said, if your mother ever comes back, Cora, let her in only as far as she's earned. Not one step further. You'll know the difference. I folded the letter along its original creases and put it back in the envelope. The hummingbird feeder was still outside the kitchen window, empty, swaying a little in the cold wind. I sat there until I was ready to drive home. I want to pause here one more time, because I think some of you have received this kind of letter. Not on paper, maybe, but in some other form. A person who saw you when no one else did, who prepared something quietly on your behalf, who left you a foundation to stand on. If you've had someone like that in your life, type Ruth in the comments. I want to honor every one of them. And if you're watching this and you don't have that person yet, I want you to know that you can become that person for someone else. That's worth something too. Now, let me take you to the porch. It was a Thursday in March, 7 weeks ago, when my mother knocked on my door. I had not heard from her since the funeral, which was 5 months earlier. Jonah was at work. Lily was at her Thursday morning playgroup 2 blocks away, where I was supposed to pick her up at noon. It was 10:47 in the morning when the knock came. I knew it was her before I opened the door. I don't know how to explain that. I just knew. She was standing on the porch in a pale yellow blouse and gray slacks, her hair done the way she always did it for important occasions, her hands wrapped around a white envelope. She looked older than I remembered, which was reasonable, because she was. She looked tired in a way that went past the ordinary tiredness of a long drive. She looked like someone who had rehearsed what she was going to say and was now uncertain whether any of it was going to work. I opened the door and stood in the doorway. I did not invite her in. Cora, she said. I've been thinking about this for a long time. I waited. She said she and my father had been doing a lot of praying and a lot of talking, and that she had come to understand that she had made some mistakes. She said she wanted to move forward. She said she thought it was time for Jonah to meet the family, for Lily to know her grandparents, for all of us to start fresh. She held out the envelope. She said it was a letter she had written, her thoughts, what she'd been working through. I looked at the envelope. I did not take it. I said, "Why now, Mom?" She blinked. She said she'd already told me. She'd been doing a lot of thinking. I said, "What changed?" She looked down at the envelope and then back at me. She said, "I heard about your grandmother's house. Davis mentioned it." She said it carefully, like she was setting something fragile down on a table. "I know she left it to you. I know there was some money. I just thought, now that things are more settled for you, it might be a good time to reconnect." My voice did not waver. I noticed that. I said, "So you heard about the trust?" She said, "I just thought it was a good time to." I said, "Mom, I need to ask you something directly, and I need you to answer me directly. Are you here because you believe you were wrong 6 years ago? Or are you here because you found out that Grandma Ruth left me her estate?" The porch was quiet. A car passed on the street. My neighbor's wind chimes moved in the light March air. My mother looked at me for a long moment. I could see her working through her answer, weighing it, trying to find the version that would open the door. She said, "It's not just about that." I said, "That's not the same as no." She said, "Cora, I'm your mother." I said, "I know you are." She said, "I drove 4 hours." I said, "I know you did." She held the envelope out again. I looked at it. I thought about Grandma Ruth's letter, the 2 pages in careful script, folded along their original creases in the envelope I kept in the top drawer of my desk at home. I thought about the yellow kitchen and the cedar chest and the hummingbird feeder. I thought about 22 people at my wedding and Jonah's mother dancing until 11 o'clock. I thought about Lily, 18 months old in the hospital room, and Grandma Ruth holding her for 2 hours without saying much of anything. Just holding her. I thought about what Grandma Ruth had written at the end of the second page. "Let her in only as far as she's earned. Not one step further. You'll know the difference." I said, "I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to hear me." My mother lowered the envelope slightly. I said, I have spent 6 years building a life that is whole. A real marriage, a real home, a daughter who knows she is loved without conditions. I did not build that life in spite of what happened 6 years ago. I built it because of what happened, because losing your approval forced me to stop looking for it and start building something that didn't need it. I said, Jonah is not a test I'm asking you to pass. He is my husband. He is Lily's father. He is the best person I know. And if you want to be part of our lives, that is the only version of our lives that exists. There is no version where you come in and he's a footnote or a compromise or something you're tolerating. My mother's eyes were wet. She said, I know I was wrong. I said, I believe you believe that. She said, then can we try? I looked at her for a long moment. I thought about the cornbread in the cast iron skillet. I thought about the way she'd sung along to Dolly Parton when I was small, before she'd decided what the world was supposed to look like and arranged everything accordingly. I thought about the fact that she was my mother and that I had missed her, not the mother who made the phone call 6 years ago, but the one who existed before that, the one who was still in there somewhere, tired and older and standing on my porch in a pale yellow blouse with her hands wrapped around an envelope. I said, here's what trying looks like. You call Jonah and you apologize to him directly. Not to me on his behalf. To him. You tell him what you told me, that you were wrong. And then we'll have dinner, the 4 of us, and we'll see what we're building. But I need you to understand that Lily will not grow up watching her grandfather be welcomed and her father be tolerated. That is not a negotiation. My mother nodded. She was crying quietly now, the way she cried at funerals, contained, dignified, not quite willing to let it be fully seen. I said, and Mom, I need you to be honest with yourself about why you drove here today. Not with me. With yourself. Because the version of this where you're here because of the trust and the house, that version doesn't work. And I'll know the difference. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. She said, I know I haven't earned much. I said, no. But you can start. I took the envelope. I did not open it on the porch. I told her I would read it and I would call her. I told her I meant what I'd said about Jonah. She nodded. She walked back to her car, which was parked at the curb, a silver sedan I didn't recognize. She must have traded in the old one. She sat in it for a few minutes before she started the engine. I stood in the doorway and watched her go. Then I went inside, put the envelope on the kitchen counter, and drove to pick up Lily. What happened after that unfolded over the following weeks in the way that real things unfold. Slowly, imperfectly, with no clean resolution that arrives all at once. My mother called Jonah 4 days after she came to the porch. I don't know exactly what she said, because Jonah told me only the parts that mattered, that she had apologized, that she had said she was wrong, that she had said it without qualification. He said she cried. He said he believed her. He said he thought she was genuinely ashamed, not performing shame, but actually carrying it. Jonah is a careful thinker. He does not extend that kind of assessment lightly. We had dinner at our house 3 weeks later, on a Saturday evening. My mother came. My father came too, which surprised me. He had not been part of the conversation up to that point, and I had not known whether he would show. He arrived looking like a man who understood he was there to answer for something, which was more self-awareness than I had expected from him. He shook Jonah's hand at the door and held it for a moment longer than a standard handshake, the way men do when they're trying to say something they don't have words for. Lily was 2 years old and she did not know who these people were, but she was in the phase where she wanted to show every new person her stuffed elephant, whose name was Gerald, after no one in particular. She walked up to my father within 10 minutes of his arrival and held Gerald out to him with both hands. My father took the elephant with the careful solemnity of someone receiving something precious, looked at it, looked at Lily, and said, "Well, hello, Gerald." Lily laughed. My father smiled, and it was a real smile, the kind that reaches the eyes, and for a moment he looked like the man I remembered from before everything got complicated. My mother helped me in the kitchen. We made cornbread in the cast iron skillet. Neither of us mentioned it. We didn't need to. Dinner was not easy, but it was real. There were silences and there were moments where the conversation found its footing and there were moments where it didn't. My father talked to Jonah about water infrastructure and listened with genuine interest when Jonah explained his current project. My mother talked too much at first, the way people do when they're nervous, and then she settled and became more like herself. She held Lily after dinner while I cleaned up, and I watched her from the kitchen doorway, this woman who had cost me 6 years, holding my daughter with the careful tenderness of someone who understood she was being given something she had not earned. I read her letter the night after she came to the porch, after Lily was asleep. It was 4 pages, handwritten, and it was the most honest thing I had ever seen my mother produce. She did not make excuses. She said she had been afraid, and that she had dressed her fear up as principle and told herself it was faith, and that she had understood for several years that she was wrong but had not known how to come back from it. She said she had watched me become a person she admired from a distance and that the distance was her fault. She said she was not asking me to forgive her, only to let her try. I folded the letter along its creases and put it in the cedar chest I had brought back from the house on Marshfield Road. I keep it at the foot of our bed now, the way Grandma Ruth kept hers. I have started my own system, envelopes by year, tied with kitchen twine. I don't know exactly what I'm keeping them for. I think I'm keeping them because Grandma Ruth taught me that the record of what actually happened is the most important thing a person can maintain. Not for revenge, not for leverage. Just for truth. So that when memory tries to rewrite itself, you have something to hold it accountable to. The house on Marshfield Road is still in the trust. I have not sold it. I drove out there in February, after the meeting with Gerald Harmon, and walked through every room, and stood in the yellow kitchen for a long time with my hand on the counter where the cast iron skillet used to sit. I filled the hummingbird feeder. I sat on the screened porch and looked out at the loblolly pines until the light turned gold the way it used to. I am going to keep the house. I think Lily should know that kitchen. I think she should know the screened porch and the cedar chest and the system of envelopes tied with kitchen twine. I think she should know that her great-grandmother watched what happened and acted quietly and left a foundation that no one could take away. I think that is the most important thing I can give her. Not the house itself, but the knowledge that someone built something solid on her behalf before she was old enough to need it. Davis called me in April. We had not spoken in nearly 3 years, which was its own separate story. He had sided with my parents at the beginning and then simply gone quiet, the way people do when they don't want to choose, and so they choose by not choosing. He called on a Sunday morning and said he'd heard from my father that we'd had dinner. He said he was glad. He said he was sorry he hadn't called sooner. I said I was glad he called now. We talked for 40 minutes about nothing important. His kids, my work, a road trip he was planning. And it was surprisingly easy, the way things sometimes are when enough time has passed and both people have grown up a little. My mother and I are not what we were. I don't know if we will ever be what we were, and I'm not sure I want exactly that, because what we were included a daughter who managed her mother's comfort at the expense of her own life. What we are building now is something different, smaller in some ways, more honest in others. She calls on Sunday evenings. She asks about Lily and about Jonah and about my work. She does not offer opinions on my choices. I think this costs her something, and I think she pays it willingly, and I think that is the closest thing to an apology that she is capable of sustaining. My father is quieter about all of it, the way he is quiet about everything. But he sends Lily cards now, signed in his careful printing, with a small drawing in the corner, a bird, a flower, a fish, that I think he does himself, though I have never asked. Lily calls him the Birdman because of the drawings, which delights him in a way he tries not to show too obviously. I think about Grandma Ruth every day. Not always in a sad way. Sometimes I think about her when I'm filling the hummingbird feeder, which I do every Thursday morning now, the same way she did. Sometimes I think about her when I'm sitting at the kitchen table with Lily, teaching her to play a card game, watching her small hands figure out how to hold the cards. Sometimes I think about her when I'm in the cedar chest looking for something, running my hands over the envelopes tied with kitchen twine, feeling the particular weight of a record kept carefully over time. She told me once that the most important thing a woman can own is the record of what actually happened. She was right. But I think what she really meant was something a little larger than that. I think she meant that the most important thing a woman can own is the truth of her own life, not the version that was convenient for other people, not the version that fit inside someone else's picture of what the world was supposed to look like, but the actual version. The one with Jonah at the kitchen table reading a water quality report. The one with Lily laughing at the stuffed elephant named Gerald. The one with 22 people at a wedding and a mother-in-law dancing until 11 o'clock. The one with a yellow kitchen and a screened porch and a cedar chest at the foot of the bed. That is the version I am keeping. If you're watching this and you recognize yourself in any part of this story, in the phone call, in the 6 years of silence, in the porch, in the letter, I want you to know something. The people who love you correctly will never ask you to be smaller to fit their comfort. My grandmother told me that when I was 13 years old, and I did not fully understand it until I was standing in a doorway at 33, holding the door open exactly as far as someone had earned. You are allowed to hold the door at exactly that distance. Not one step further. Not one step less. You'll know the difference. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching. Drop a comment and tell me what you thought. I read every single one. Hit subscribe if this story spoke to you, and share it with someone who might need to hear it today. I'll see you in the next one.